What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I wanted to make a dedicated video on why I feel dead silence or some form of a footstep dampening perk is so important in Call of Duty. And I've noticed while I have addressed this topic many times in the past, I've never made a dedicated video on it, and that's what I wanted to do today. Just put all of my thoughts and arguments into one video here, so I just have that one spot where I can refer people to that when they ask my opinion on this topic. And diving right into this, I wanted to briefly look at the history of footstep dampening perks in Call of Duty. Since the franchise introduced perks with Call of Duty 4, there have been 15 main Call of Duty titles. I'm not including like mobile or any side projects or anything like that, just the main Call of Duty titles. And out of those 15, 13 of these have had a footstep dampening perk in them. The only two that don't are Advanced Warfare, where your feet are rarely on the ground anyway if you're exo boosting all over the place. So it's not quite as relevant there, but Advanced Warfare didn't have a footstep dampening perk, and then Modern Warfare 2019. This is the only other Call of Duty game that didn't have a footstep dampening perk, and instead it was there as a limited use field upgrade. And I just wanted to bring that up at the beginning to show that a footstep dampening perk has been a staple feature in Call of Duty for the vast majority of franchise history. And for a lot of people that love this franchise, it's one of perhaps many reasons that we choose Call of Duty over other first-person shooters on the market. Now, obviously on its own, that's not a good enough argument to keep something around. Just because it's always been there doesn't necessarily mean it should always be there going forward. I just wanted to point out, especially for the newcomers to the franchise that maybe showed up with Modern Warfare 2019, because I know there were a lot of you, that it is a staple feature in Call of Duty, and it's not like it's some brand new thing that has never been tried before. So with that in mind, let's get into my three primary arguments in favor of having a footstep dampening perk, not field upgrade, in Call of Duty specifically. And I'm going to address that as well as many of the counter arguments toward the end of the video, so if you guys wouldn't mind holding off on your counter arguments till you hear me out, that would be great. So my first big argument in favor of having a footstep dampening perk, or at least not having very loud footstep audio like we saw in Modern Warfare 2019, is gameplay pacing and flow. Call of Duty has been built on that faster paced action and flow compared to many other FPS games on the market, and it's once again one of the big reasons many of us love Call of Duty over other franchises. When you have louder footstep audio with no dampening perk available, this tends to considerably slow down the gameplay pacing and flow, and we saw this in Modern Warfare 2019. Now, I know there are other elements of that game that also contributed to the slower pacing and flow, but footstep audio and the lack of a dampening perk was one of the big ones. The simple fact is, when you have loud footsteps and no dampening perk available, this rewards and encourages stationary play while punishing or at the very least discouraging players from moving around. And this should be fairly self-explanatory, but I know some people don't quite get this. If you're not moving, you're not generating footstep audio for the enemies to hear, so you're not revealing your position through audio. And to top that off, you're not hearing your own footsteps, which makes it much easier to focus on external audio, so other players' footsteps. Whereas on the flip side of that, if you're somebody that's moving around, you're generating a lot of footstep audio for the enemies to hear, and therefore giving away your exact position in real time, while simultaneously having to hear your own footstep audio because you're moving around, which makes it more difficult for you to hear audio cues. So it's pretty clear what kind of gameplay that tends to incentivize when you have louder footstep audio and no dampening perk. And for players that like to be aggressive and would rather be running around and being aggressive, it discourages them from doing this, and I liken this to the feeling of a ball and chain sometimes, where I want to make a move, but I've got this thing holding me back. And in the case of Modern Warfare 2019, I do hold myself back until my field upgrade charges, and now I'm free to make the move that I've wanted to make this whole time, but I had to wait for it. Alternatively, if I still want to make that move without my dead silence field upgrade charged up, the next best thing is to either crouch walk or aim down sight walk to approach the target. So basically move at a snail's pace in order to approach my target, and to me, that's just not congruent with Call of Duty's gameplay. That might work great in a slower paced tactical shooter, not Call of Duty though. So that's my first argument, and one of the big ones, and this actually transitions nicely into my second argument, and this is simply playstyle variety. With loud footsteps and no dampening perk, I feel the stationary playstyle becomes far too powerful relative to the other playstyles in the game. And to me, it's all about balance here. I'm not necessarily saying it should lean way too far in one direction or the other. It needs to be balanced appropriately. Like I just said, when you have those loud footsteps and no dampening perk, this essentially forces a slower playstyle onto players that want to play faster. Whereas if you do include a dampening perk, this doesn't force a faster style of play, it just allows for it. It doesn't punish people that are staying stationary, it just doesn't give them an extra reward for being stationary. One of my favorite playstyles in Call of Duty, and this has been my favorite playstyle for a very long time, is a stealthy flanking playstyle. I love finding that gap or making that gap in the enemy team's setup in order to sneak around, get in beside or behind them, and take them off guard. If those players aren't paying attention to the many tools at their disposal, mainly the minimap and seeing where their teammates are positioning, where their teammates are dying, and I managed to sneak through an open lane, I should be rewarded for that, and that's on them for not utilizing those tools in order to recognize that situation before it happens. That's a totally fair and balanced interaction between a flanker and a more stationary player that's locking down a power position or a lane. And the moment you take that footstep dampening perk away, now you can make that perfect flank and play everything just right, but that guy will just hear your footsteps coming, know exactly where you are before you're even in his line of sight. He can pre-aim you and kill you, and there's nothing you could have really done about that aside from sit and wait for your field upgrade to charge so you can play with your preferred playstyle for limited chunks of the game rather than the entire match. I personally see no need to severely limit the flanking playstyle in Call of Duty. It's a perfectly viable playstyle with perfectly viable counterplay without loud footstep audio, so why relegate that playstyle to a limited time when your field upgrade is charged? And finally, this brings us to my third main argument in favor of having a footstep dampening perk, and this is, at least within the context of Call of Duty's gameplay, footstep dampening perks, or the ability to navigate around the map without enemies being able to use footsteps as a primary source of awareness, this increases the skill gap as well as the skill ceiling of the game. One of the biggest elements that has always separated an average to below average player from a higher skilled player in Call of Duty is understanding and learning how to control the big picture in the match. Basically looking outside of your immediate surroundings and looking beyond the current situation you're in order to make appropriate decisions to control that big picture and control the outcome of not only your next fight, but the fight after that. And this big picture awareness comes from a variety of sources in Call of Duty. A lot of it comes down to your map knowledge, so knowing all of the different power positions, knowing the common routes, the timings, the spawn logic, as well as locations, how to read a minimap properly, always making sure you have good lane control, always being aware of your teammate positioning on the minimap and potential holes in your setups where enemies might sneak through and get a good flank on you. And when you combine all of this together, it gives you a great indication of where you should be expecting enemies to be coming from, as well as when you should be running into enemies. And the moment you have loud footsteps with no dampening perk available, it essentially eliminates the need to have those higher level skills. Instead of taking in all of these various pieces of data that you're getting from the minimap or from other areas and combining that with your game knowledge, your map knowledge, your spawn knowledge, and putting that all together to form a big picture, now you're just listening for footsteps and using your ears to know exactly where an enemy player is because you can just straight up hear them and hear where they are. There's little to no analysis or interpretation of that data. It's now just, oh, I hear a guy. He's right on the other side of that wall right there. A great analogy for this is chess versus checkers. Listening for footsteps and then reacting to those footsteps without really requiring any other game knowledge, that's checkers. That's basic. It doesn't really require much practice to get good at that. Whereas learning to form and master that big picture using all of the other sources of data combined with your game knowledge, that's more chess. That requires a lot more thought, a lot more processing, a lot more planning for the situation as well. And that significantly adds to the gap between an average player that can't process all that information quickly while also dealing with gunfights versus somebody that has put the time in and mastered all of those areas. And this also provides a lot more depth to the experience by increasing that skill ceiling. It gives you something to work toward. You can always work toward improving your ability to form that big picture more accurately. Whereas with loud footsteps and no dampening perk, you don't really need those skills because you're just going to hear the people coming and you can just react to the situation rather than being forced to plan for that situation. I see a lot of people say that it's more tactical to have loud footsteps and no dampening perk I disagree. I actually feel it's more tactical to not have the location of enemy players spoon-fed to you through audio alone, and instead having to use data from a variety of sources combined with game knowledge to make appropriate decisions in real time. That's far more tactical, in my opinion, than sitting and listening for footsteps and then pre-firing when they come around a corner. So there we go. Those are my 3 primary arguments in favor of having a footstep dampening perk, or at the very least, significantly quieter footsteps in a Call of Duty game. But now I want to move on to a different section here, and this is, why do I specify for Call of Duty when I'm talking about this? Why does this not apply to all FPS games? And I think that's a very valid question, because in some games, it's extremely important to have louder footstep audio than Call of Duty, and having a footstep dampening perk would be a terrible idea in those games. So why Call of Duty? Well, the first reason it makes more sense in Call of Duty than many other games is simply the map design and the typical engagement distances that you would tend to find. With many FPS games, the engagement distances are significantly longer, especially looking at something like Battlefield, for instance, or even Warzone or something like that. Typically in these games, you're going to have a lot of engagements that are well beyond the footstep audio range, whereas in Call of Duty multiplayer, that footstep audio is going to be playing a much bigger role in a lot more of your situations because it tends to be a lot more close quarters and cramped. So therefore, I feel Call of Duty footsteps need to be kept in check more so than those other games with longer engagement distances. On that same note of how Call of Duty maps are designed, most of them tend to follow a general 3-lane structure. And as a result, it makes the maps quite controllable. It makes it viable for you to be aware of those 3 lanes at any given time if you have good minimap awareness and you understand how to read a minimap properly in real time, compared to other FPS games that are a lot more open. And I'm going to pick on Warzone here, for instance. In Warzone, you're playing in an open world environment. You can't possibly control every single angle that an enemy could potentially attack you from, because it's not like they only have 3 main options to get to you. They could come from literally any direction at any time. As a result, in those games, having footstep audio is sort of a requirement. You kind of need that extra bit of data to process. Otherwise, you're going to run into a lot of frustrating situations where you get snuck up on through no fault of your own. Whereas in Call of Duty multiplayer, like I said earlier, if you're getting snuck up on and you're relying on that footstep audio as your primary source of awareness, that's on you. There's tons of data available to you that you can see and process for yourself. And if you fail to do that, that's on you with the way these maps are structured. Additionally, another thing with Call of Duty that does play into this is the general lack of urgency to move and approach an objective, for instance, combined with the player base's general apathy toward playing objectives or trying to win the game, because Call of Duty is much more about individual rewards like kill streaks, for instance, or individual challenges like camo challenges, unlike most other FPS games where people actually want to win. That's their primary goal, is winning the game. Call of Duty doesn't play the same way as those games. And with this lack of urgency to move around, combined with loud footsteps making it punishing to move around, there's really not much incentive for many Call of Duty players to ever just leave a camping position. They're just trying to get their highest kill streak up, so why would they move, especially if it's punishing to do so? And therefore, I feel we shouldn't have extra barriers that may discourage people from wanting to move around the map and maybe play the objective and try to win the game. Having loud footsteps with no dampening perk provides that barrier and just encourages people even more to just sit around and grind for their streaks in a camping position. Now, finally, for my reasons when we're talking about Call of Duty specifically, this is the general time to kill that we have in Call of Duty. This is very fast compared to a lot of other shooters on the market, and as a result, there's little to no chance to outplay somebody that's just sitting in a corner, listening for footsteps and pre-firing you because they hear exactly when you're about to come around a corner. In games with a slower time to kill, if somebody does that to you, you're still going to be at a disadvantage going into that fight because they're going to get the first shots on target, but at least you have the potential to now use your movement skills, for instance, to outplay that player. With a really fast time to kill, there's often no counterplay involved there. You're just dead simply because they heard your footsteps coming. And with that, we can now move on to the last section of this video, and this is just where I'm going to be addressing common counterpoints that I see when I see arguments surrounding the inclusion of a footstep dampening perk. One argument I see a lot is you just want to blindly rush around with no consequence. And the answer to this one is simple. If you rush blindly in Call of Duty, with or without a footstep dampening perk, you could have completely silent footsteps. But if you're legitimately just rushing around blindly, you're not going to be successful. Consistent and effective rushing takes a lot more skill in Call of Duty than I would argue basically any other playstyle, because you have to deal with a much wider variety of situations because you're playing the whole map and you're putting yourself in a wide variety of situations. So to say that you can just blindly rush because you have quiet footsteps and still be successful, that's simply not true. Another point I see a lot of people bring up, I just wanted to address here quickly, is it shouldn't be in multiplayer because it shouldn't be in Warzone. And Warzone and multiplayer are two completely different games, and I'd argue they shouldn't use the exact same perks, or at least the perks should behave differently in Warzone versus multiplayer. So I agree with you, but this conversation is about multiplayer, not Warzone. Another counter-argument that I often see is we don't need a footstep dampening perk, but they should just balance footsteps better, and make it so maybe it's not as loud as Modern Warfare 2019. In theory, I could totally get on board with this. The problem is Modern Warfare 2019 has shown that we can't really trust them to find this perfect balance, or my perfect balance might not be your perfect balance. So in my mind, it's just much better to offer this footstep dampening perk that we're used to seeing in Call of Duty, and therefore if I feel the base footstep audio is too loud, I have an option to mitigate that while sacrificing something to gain that power. Another counter-argument or counter-question that I often get surrounding this is, what is the counter to dead silence? And my response to that is a wide variety of things. UAVs, the high alert perk, minimap awareness, spawn knowledge, keeping your head on a swivel. Don't just mount up on one piece of cover looking in one direction forever and expect not to get flanked. Or if you are going to do that, put a claymore covering your back, or a bouncing Betty, or a portable radar, or just pay attention to other audio cues that you can hear. You can hear when there's gunfire somewhere beside you or behind you, and especially if that's suppressed gunfire, that should probably alert you to the fact that somebody is likely trying to stealthily flank you and your team. Maybe you should be aware of that. All of these are effectively counters to a dead silence user. They can have very quiet or even completely silent footsteps, and there's still a wide variety of methods for determining or predicting where that player is and where they're going to be coming from. But finally, there's one last counter argument that I wanted to address, and this is the big one. I saved it for last, and I wanted to talk about this with a little bit of depth here. This is, if they bring a footstep dampening perk into the game, it will be a Crutch perk. And a Crutch perk is essentially a perk that you feel like you must use in order to compete, which means it effectively limits perk variety because you kind of have to use that perk. When it comes to this one, I'll fully admit there are certain Call of Duty games where the footstep dampening perk was 100% a Crutch perk. But it's not a Crutch perk in every Call of Duty game, and I think it's pretty easy to learn from those games. The first thing is make it so the base footstep audio isn't so loud that you feel like you need to use a footstep dampening perk in order to compete, at least in respawn game modes. I understand in Search and Destroy, if there's a footstep dampening perk, pretty much everybody's going to use it, but at the end of the day, the vast majority of modes in Call of Duty are respawn game modes, and the vast majority of the player base plays respawn game modes, so we shouldn't be designing the gameplay around the one mode that plays nothing like the rest. So some great examples of this where I didn't feel like I needed to run Dead Silence or Ninja in respawn game modes would be COD 4, Black Ops 1, Black Ops 2, World War II, Vanguard. In none of these games did I ever feel like I was at a severe disadvantage rushing around without a footstep dampening perk, because the base footsteps in those games weren't so loud that I felt like anytime I sprinted, anybody within a 30-meter radius could tell exactly where I was in real time. The next way to prevent a Dead Silence style perk from becoming a crutch is just put it in a really competitive tier of perks. Make it so you're really sacrificing something in order to choose that perk. So maybe I could have quiet footsteps, but I can't have ghosts, so now I'm showing up on the enemy's radar when they have a UAV. So you can't hear me coming, but you can see me on the minimap. Or maybe make it so I don't have explosive resistance, so you can't hear me coming, but that claymore you've got set up, that's gonna take me out. Basically, by putting it in a competitive tier of perks, you still provide players with the option to select that if it's something that they really want, but make them give up something significant in return for gaining that advantage. Additionally, another option that many older Call of Duty games used in order to prevent a footstep dampening perk from being too much of a crutch is provide a direct counter perk in the same tier of perks. Something like Amplify or Awareness from previous Call of Duty games, where it will boost enemy footstep audio, and against a Dead Silence user, it would effectively just cancel out any benefit that they had and make them sound like a normal volume player for you. I personally don't love the idea behind this because Amplify or Awareness could really be abused against people that weren't using Dead Silence, but it's absolutely a compromise I'd be willing to make if it just means I have the option to have that Dead Silence perk. And then finally, another way to prevent these perks from being complete crutches is don't provide 100% silence for every action performed while using this perk. And this is actually a common misconception I see from people that are arguing against dead silence. Even though it's often called dead silence or ninja in previous Call of Duty games, it wasn't necessarily actually dead silent. Like, you're still making footstep audio. It's just reduced by typically about 60%. So in a quiet situation, if you're really paying attention, you'll still be able to hear that dead silence user. On top of that, I think it's totally fine to have certain actions like sliding, for instance, or mantling up onto an object. I think these actions should be decently audible even if the person is using ninja or dead silence. And another thing I remember distinctly from certain Call of Duty games, I don't know for sure if this is still applying, but if you were using dead silence or ninja and you were bumping into objects around the map, that could make audio as well. So if you bump up against some bottles, it will jostle those bottles and they'll make some sound. So it did require dead silence users to be careful about how they were approaching situations, and they were still giving off certain sound cues that enemies could use against them. So it's not like it completely eliminates any audio that your character is making, it just significantly reduces it and makes it less likely that enemies can rely on sound as their primary source of awareness against you. So the claim that the introduction of a footstep dampening perk will immediately turn it into a crutch perk, that's simply not true because it hasn't always been a crutch perk in every COD game that it's been in. And there are a ton of different ways that you can balance this out properly to prevent it from being a crutch perk. So to me, that's not nearly a good enough argument to prevent the existence of a perk like this in Call of Duty. And with that, that's finally going to wrap it up for today's video on why I feel a footstep dampening perk is so important when it comes to Call of Duty. And this is where I finally want to hear from you guys in those comments down below. What's your take on this topic? Do you feel a footstep dampening perk should always exist in Call of Duty, or do you prefer it as a field upgrade, or do you think there shouldn't even be a field upgrade? There should be no ability to make your footsteps any quieter. Just let me know your stance as well as some reasoning behind it in those comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.